Mom ditched us for modeling 16 years ago. Now she's back after 6 years. Worst part is, my father and brother want to forgive her. My story is a bit long, and I apologize for the upcoming wall of text. She and my father were high school sweethearts who got pregnant at a very early age of 17 and had me a month of their prom. And we lived in a rural place that's not big enough to be called a town, but still larger than your average village. Anyway, they settled themselves to farmer's life after graduating and had my brother 7 years later. And she left us when my brother was only a month and a half old baby. To this day, I can still remember waking up to get ready for school and finding my father on the ground, kneeling over and crying, holding one of my notebooks. I was just a child at the time, and seeing my father curled up like that made me cry too. And that's when my father got a hold of his emotions and righted himself up to pick me up. She, in her hurry to leave, literally took a notebook from my school bag and wrote her half-assed excuses to why she was leaving us, how she never wanted kids, how she shouldn't have gotten pregnant, and how things should have turned out differently, and how this small town was smothering her around her neck. She needed to get away. And how the second child, my brother, was the final news that wouldn't let her breath. I learned what she wrote on that notebook a year or so later when I found it in the drawers. She left with our truck and had someone deliver us the truck a month or so later without even sending a word or anything. Just some guy came and said, "Here's your truck." My father was a mess. Afterwards, not taking care of the farm, stopped eating, started drinking. It was the fact that I stopped going to the school to take care of my brother while my aunt, her sister, and her husband's words that finally made him bounce back. But you could see he was sad for a lot of years and still, even after a decade, he would get all closed up around the time she left or on their anniversaries. It was us, Dad and I, who took care of my brother. I'd come back from the school, do the dishes that was left over from our breakfast, and take care of my brother until he was few years older than I, slowly became the woman of the house, so to speak. I'd cook the food, do the dishes, and take care of my brother after school, and my father would spend nearly all his awake hours trying to manage the farm. We weren't the richest people around, but with only one depressed adult and two small kids, we earned more than what we needed, and even saved up a bit for my brother's college fund. My father insisted that I should have one for myself as well, but I was spending too much time on domestic and farm-related stuff to actually focus on my studies. And if I have to be honest, I love the farm animals and taking care of my brother anyway. Nearly a year ago, she returned to visit her family, my aunt and us too, and she was planning settling back here permanently. We knew that she had a good few years of modeling, which led to her joining the staff of some sort of a magazine from our. And as she still called her from time to time, she tried calling us a few times as well, but I refused to talk with her. And I think she was too ashamed to ask to talk with my brother. Anyway, when she came back, she apparently had enough for setting back here with a new house and some land. After a few days of her coming here, she tried to contact us again when she and my dad ran into each other at the town center. My dad says he told her about my opinion on her, but she insisted. Apparently she owned that to me and I shove it for the lack of a better term. A few extras on the side as well. She tried the emotional, regretful parent on me with her crying and all, but I don't buy it. Or rather, I just wish she never came back to disturb us and lived in her airy, breathable big city life and left us the hell alone. My brother was not there at the time, as he's in his first year in college. He was admitted via early enrollment, thanks to him being a lovable genius that he's. I knew my dad was still in love with her. I tried to set up a few dates for him before, but it never went anywhere. And that summer, well, this summer they started dating again. To my dismay, and my brother's joy. My dad invited her over to dinner when my brother came back from his summer break, and we had a family dinner. I wanted to warn my brother about her, but seeing his enthusiasm about it, I couldn't break his heart. So I just stayed civil and didn't speak unless spoken to my father, and kept that notebook for more than a decade. But I decided to burn it when I was 19, my father, and had a pretty big fight about how I had no right to burn it. But I said to him that it was better than my brother accidentally finding it and reading how her mother thought her a noose around her neck that wouldn't let her breath. And he caved in after that. And now, whenever I see her in our house talking with my brother, who looks up to her like Dana finally granted his wish, I remember what she wrote, and the rage and hatred that goes through my very soul is becoming the goddamn noose that won't let me breath. My brother had a talk with me this morning about me being cold toward her, and it turned heated when my brother said, "Why wouldn't I be happy I finally have a mother? We finally have a mother." And I shouted back at him, "I was your mother. Not that way, Terry. And I don't have a mother." And I made my brother stormed out of the house crying, and seeing him cry made me cry while my father tried to meditate between us and failed. The fact that I can't tell him that I hate her because she detested us, her own goddamn children, because it will hurt her more. The fact that she abandoned and scored the loveliest, most innocent-looking baby with sky-blue eyes when she was supposed to be a mother to him. I was goddamn 7 years old child when I cooed at him and changed his diapers for the first time with my aunt showing me how it's done. And I didn't resent him. I loved him like a brother, and I loved him like she was supposed to. And the little comments people make about her and me now that she's back are just salt to the wound about our likeness. Even my brother once commented on how we look so alike, smile like each other, and how she probably looked like me when she had him. And it took all my willpower to not to snap at him. I know that being this bitter, cold person will drive my brother away, and I know I should stop if I wish to preserve this blissful moment, even though the cause is her. But I can't help it. The worst part is, since she came back, she's not the heartless piece of shit that left us. She never raised her voice when I cursed at her, when my brother was not around or told her to leave us alone, or when the time I asked if she was avoiding me because I shouldn't be born at all, and she's trying to fix a mistake by avoiding me. I once even told her that. Does she think about the news when my brother hugs her and she just looked like she was punched and got teary-eyed but only apologized and didn't try to defend herself? I can't even enjoy hurting her. She doesn't fight back. She's not the monster I made her out to be. At least she isn't now. And the worst part today made me resentful and tired. Like I don't even have strength to feel emotions. I actually understand the resentful in this. Now, am I truly just like her for resenting my brother, for forgiving her and calling her his mother? When I raised him myself with a depressed father at home when I was just a child myself, or the fact that my father accepted her back so quickly makes me see him as a weak-willed man. That makes me question the respect I have for him. Did I resent the fact that I stayed here on the farm, not going to collage? They made me skip a grade as well before my mother left us. What? I find some sort of new outlook on life. A collage that would make me more like my brother or father and be happy instead of being resentful. I vented quite a bit, and I'm sorry and thankful to you guys as I think it let me onward a bit. So my question is, what am I going to do now? Story 2. I found tampons in my husband's car and thought he was cheating, but it was way worse. Now our marriage is over. So I, 29F, have been with my husband 30M for 7 years, married for 4. I've never had reason to suspect he was unfaithful to me or even remotely dissatisfied with our marriage. He likes to joke that we're still living the honeymoon phase nearly 5 years and 2 kids in. I wouldn't have questioned that or him were it not for a surprise I found in his car last month when buckling our daughter into her car seat. I noticed something slotted between the cushions. I pulled it out and saw that it was a tampon. This wouldn't have been so unusual had I not had an IUD. That has stopped my period for the past year, and I didn't even recognize the wrapper style. I brought it to my husband's attention, and he didn't seem to understand what it was, let alone why I was holding it until I told him where I'd found it and why I was almost certain it wasn't mine. He shrugged and said it probably belonged to his coworker, Fiona. It's not uncommon for my husband to carpool, to lunch with his coworkers, and we're both fairly close to Fiona and her husband, so I figured it was entirely possible the tampon had slipped out of her purse whenever he had driven with them or offered her a ride. No big deal. I put it out of my mind until we had dinner with Fiona and her husband a couple of weeks later. I had sincerely wanted to believe my husband. I just couldn't get over the way it had been tucked in the seat and how my husband had seemed not to have any regard for it whatsoever. Maybe playing dumb? I don't know. I did something that I now feel kind of crazy for doing. I faked an emergency and asked Fiona if she had any tampons while we were out together. She handed me one almost identical to the tampon I found in our back seat, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So, the tampon there was probably the same tampon here. And in all likelihood, there was an innocent explanation as to why it had been left in the back seat in the first place. I thought I'd seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene products until I found another tampon this morning, this time in my sock drawer. I feel physically ill at the thought of my husband having an affair, and even more nauseated at the thought that the woman might have left these tampons out for me to find. If it was my husband's coworker, why would she give herself away by offering me one the other night? In any other situation, I would want to talk to my husband about this, but I feel too sick and embarrassed to approach him with what I found. What should I do? Update contemplating every possible source of two for the past few weeks, but I wanted to share an update. It wasn't until my younger 2-year-old daughter came down with something last week that I felt any differently. I wanted to be the one home taking care of her, but my husband insisted that I stay at work while he stayed home with her. I was okay with that. My sister and her husband figured it was a good sign that he would take the time off at a moment's notice. And at that point, we were all already beginning to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the third or fourth day, I was just happy to see a near-healthy child and a husband who was helping see her through it. Toward the end of that week, though, I came home to something strange. The toddler that I'd left that morning at an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie I'd never seen before, with a tiny clip in her hair. I can't say I have the sharpest memory, but I have a pretty good sense of what my kids wear on a day-to-day basis, and particularly what kinds of clothes they wear. I'd sworn off the full-length sleep suits with snaps across the front long before we'd ever had our second. The long snaps are just a pain in the ass, and a no-go for efficient diaper changes, IMO. It's just not something I would dress her in, and my husband knows as much. He doesn't plan for or buy the girls' clothes, and he certainly doesn't accessorize them. So, I was bewildered and kind of floored at the thought of someone around our sick child without my knowledge. A final update. After nearly losing my mind over a hair clip in a onesie, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with the accusations and half-baked guesswork. I've gotten so absorbed in the paranoia and misery of my situation that I wasn't sleeping, eating, or caring for my kids the way I should have been, and I wasn't getting any answers. So I decided to pull the trigger on the hidden cameras and have them shipped to my sister's house with my bill agreeing to help with the install/setup over at mine before the cameras were ever delivered. Though I got my long-awaited confirmation last week, a ring notification had alerted me to a motion at the front door while I was at work, half expecting to see a delivery person, pet, or lawn care salesman for the 15th time. You can imagine my surprise when I saw a clip of a young woman leading my daughter into the house, hand in hand with my husband and other daughter close behind them. The girls were supposed to be in daycare and my husband at work. The woman, as far as I knew, was living 2 states away with a court order keeping her there. I immediately called my husband to ask him what the fuck this woman was doing at our house. He didn't answer, so I texted it to him. Even in his stupidity, he probably realized he had messed up by going through the front door, knew I had gotten the ring notification, and wanted to delay the inevitable by the 5th or 6th. Subsequent call, though, he did pick up the woman on the camera was my husband's sister. As I would come to find out later, she was the likely source of both tampons, the onesie and the bow. She is also a registered sex offender and a recovering addict who spent the better part of her adolescence and young adulthood coercing the silence of another one of my husband's family members after she had molested them. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years, and from the way my husband talked about her, I didn't expect I ever would. But he or she was in our house with our children. My husband swore this was all in my head, the tampons, the onesie, the bow, and all the rest. He was perfectly content to watch me agonize for weeks over a woman he insisted didn't exist, shrugging off each progressively more unsettling discovery like it was news to him and telling me I was being irrational. He insinuated that I was experiencing postpartum depression 2 years after I'd given birth, 4 years after I'd told him that one of my biggest fears for motherhood was to suffer PPD like my mother had with me, to not be fully present for our babies and be left with a world of guilt and regret as they grew older. He told me I wasn't sleeping enough, that I missed the girls too much, that I needed to take a step back and reevaluate the state of my mental health. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was my husband and because no other version of events made sense. Now, after a month of this mind fuck, I have nothing to show for my trust but this pathetic situation and a lot of anger. Story 3. Cheating ex-wife used our daughters to force me to reconcile with her. Doesn't really sound like a big problem, right? Yeah. Well, while I wish I could just plain tell her to piss off and never bother me again, there is the matter of us having 2 daughters and sharing custody, so I can't excise her from my life on a permanent basis. Not without removing our daughters, too. We married fairly early in our lives back when we were 20, and we had been dating for 3 years before that. Our daughters were born in the very first year of the marriage, and there were some complications, which meant my ex-wife would have difficulty conceiving again. Didn't matter to me at the time because I was just glad she made it healthy and fine through the whole ordeal and that we already had 2 beautiful baby girls to love and raise up. The marriage lasted for 9 years, ended when I divorced her for cheating. I have absolutely no tolerance for it, and I don't believe in forcing myself to suffer needlessly for shit that wasn't my fault to begin with. While this might sound incredulous to some folks, any love I had for my ex-wife was pretty much killed when I found out about her cheating and the details behind it. So yeah, this isn't a threat about me moving on from her. I've done that 7 years ago. Hell, I don't even hate her. I just don't give a damn about what goes on in her life unless it concerns our daughters. The problem is that it's only me that moved on from the whole thing. The ex-wife, her family, and even our daughters have kept trying to get us back together. Even though I have made it plain for everyone that I have no interest of ever doing that. Me not dating at first, for a few years after the divorce might have been giving them false hope, but I sure as fuck wasn't going to jump into another relationship so soon after. Not with our daughters to look after. They were my number one priority, besides my own issues, which stemmed from the ex's cheating those issues. By the way, I got resolved with the help of friends, family, and some counseling. So yeah, that's over and done with. I have no issue in communicating with our girls. None whatsoever. Anything else they can understand is just fine. There's never been any fighting, no yelling, no nonsensical teenage rebellion thus far, no tantrums thrown, and so on. Pretty great, right? Except this whole thing they know about her cheating on me. And it was their mother, in fact, who told them about it some 3 years ago or so. I imagine she's been feeding them some kind of bullshit since then, and I've asked her countless times to stop with it. But it wasn't helping anyone that it only prevented them from moving on. But the ex-wife didn't stop. She apparently just got subtler about it. In all the years since we divorced, she hasn't dated or slept with anyone else. While I suppose she thinks that admirable, I don't. To be honest, I find it kind of insulting. When we were married, she fucked someone else, but now she's just fine. Going without sex for 7 years. Whatever, not that it matters. While I could ignore the occasional mentions of their mother, of how well she looks of them showing me photos they took with her, obviously all dolled up for my sake. It's gotten worse lately. Why? Because I have a girlfriend. Clemens is not the first since the divorce, but she is the most serious relationship I had since my marriage ended. She also happens to be 8 years my junior before getting together as a couple. We knew each other for 4 years through a shared hobby, so basically it was a gradual transition from being friends to being involved with each other. I can honestly say I love this woman. It was a surprise to me when I realized that because while I didn't really want to admit it to myself, I was afraid for a time that what my ex-wife did to me damaged me on some fundamental level and rendered me incapable of ever truly loving someone else like I once did her. Initially, my daughters had very little to say about our relationship, much like they didn't comment anything on the previous two. I had post-divorce. But then they started coming home ahead of the schedule we set up in advance, and they'd find me and Clemens together. Nothing compromising, not sex or anything of the sort. Then came the grumbling. Then came the, why is she here? Question then came. It's not fair to Mom what you're doing, as if I was actually doing this solely to spite or hurt their mother. So I sat them down and talked. And I talked and I talked. But they're just not getting it. They simply won't give up on this preposterous fantasy of theirs where I get back with their mother. Clemens, thank God, has been understanding and isn't upset by their behavior. She's basically saying to give them time, but I kind of doubt that will work. It hasn't so far, so I have no idea why more time would change anything anyway, since I'm really all out of ideas. I figured I might as well ask you folks here if any one of you might have an idea how to handle this. Is there even a way, an approach of any sort that could work on my daughters, realizing I will not under any circumstances get back with her mother? Update. It's been a while since I was first here, and I was reminded recently that I owed an update to the kind and good people here who helped me with our troubles. A lot of things has happened. Among those things, my daughters actually stumbled across my post. I had no idea they even browsed Reddit, let alone this place. When I came home one day from work, I found them crying. They pretty much jumped me, hugged me, wouldn't let me go, and begged me to forgive them. Sadly, they had read one of my replies and found out the dreadful extent of my ex-wife's affair and how much it had devastated me. It took us a while, but we got through it as a family. There was nothing for me to forgive. They're still young and they love their mother who took that love and used it to manipulate them. That's on her, not them. There was some much-needed counseling, but after several months, the woman who was helping us heal and move on has said that nothing more needed to be done, and they should only check in with her once in a while rather than continue their weekly sessions. We're closer than we were before, but their relationship with their mother has suffered for it, which I think is completely understandable. But I still caution them about lingering too much on what she did. Since I had gotten over what she did all those years ago, that was something also resolved in counseling both their own and our shared ones. So it's all behind us now. I had a brief confrontation with my ex-wife about it and made it clear that she was to not talk about this getting back together nonsense anymore with our daughters. I can't tell if it really got through to her, but my daughters have not been pestered about me since then, or they simply ignore their mother and don't bring it up at home. Either way, so long as my daughters are doing fine, I could care less about what my ex-wife is doing. Since the situation had improved, things had also become much better between my daughters and my girlfriend. So much that they actually started talking with her rather than just exchanged her greetings and goodbyes, even occasionally asking for tips on something girly stuff, of course. And I can't tell you how much it warms my heart to see it happening for the first time. I'll admit that also helped me push my thoughts in the direction of proposing to my girlfriend, who had been incredibly supportive and understanding through all of this. We had known each other for a long time now, spent so much time as a couple, and after all this mess, I didn't really think there was anything more I could do to express my love for her. However, I was beaten to the punch a few months ago. Clemens, together with my daughters, surprised me one day and proposed to me. I have to say that I felt very odd, but also very happy. Not just the proposal, but that my daughters had actually worked with my girlfriend on that day with dinner and a night out. To put it simply, I was blown away. It was a small and private ceremony with only our closest friends and family attending. Currently, we're also expecting, and my daughters are looking forward to having a baby brother or sister to spoil Jill. Doctor. My daughters had found my previous post and saw in one of the replies how deeply I was hurt by their mother's cheating. Asked for forgiveness, there was no need for it. We worked through our issues together, both at home and in some counseling, and we healed from it and got much better. Even their relationship with my girlfriend had improved so much that one day they helped her arrange a nice night for us where she proposed to me. We're married and currently expecting with my daughters, eagerly looking forward to having a younger sibling to spoil rotten.